She arrived at the naval base as a civilian contractor, young officers mocking her. Just another Pentagon paper pusher, they thought. But when USS Columbia nuclear submarine surfaced for her alone, everyone froze, because this woman was that submarine's former commander. Welcome to Behind Quiet History. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button. The Naval Submarine Base, New London in Groton, Connecticut, stood as one of the most important military installations in the United States, serving as the primary East Coast home port for the Navy's nuclear submarine fleet. The base's strategic importance was matched only by its tradition of excellence and the elite nature of the submarine service, which attracted some of the military's most skilled and dedicated personnel. On a crisp October morning, the base was experiencing its usual level of controlled activity as submarines prepared for deployment, crews conducted training exercises, and the complex logistics of nuclear submarine operations continued around the clock. The submarine piers extended into the Thames River, where the sleek silhouettes of Los Angeles-class and Virginia-class submarines represented the cutting edge of American naval technology. Among the day's scheduled activities was a routine briefing for Pentagon contractors who were conducting an assessment of submarine readiness protocols. The meeting was part of a larger Department of Defense initiative to evaluate and improve the efficiency of submarine operations, and it required input from both active-duty personnel and civilian defense experts. Sarah Mitchell arrived at the base's main gate at 07:30 hours, presenting her Pentagon contractor credentials to the security personnel for processing. At 48 years old, she wore a conservative gray business suit and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to professional environments. Her civilian attire and contractor badge immediately marked her as an outsider in the military setting, distinguishing her from the uniformed personnel who populated the base. The security processing took longer than usual, as civilian contractors required additional screening and escort procedures that weren't necessary for military personnel. Sarah waited patiently while her credentials were verified and her temporary base access was arranged, observing the efficient operations of one of the Navy's most important facilities. Lieutenant Commander Jake Roberts, the base's operations officer, had been assigned to escort Sarah and the other contractors through their assessment activities. At 32 years old, Roberts represented the new generation of submarine officers who had grown up with advanced technology and sophisticated training programs. He was competent and professional, but like many younger officers, he sometimes struggled to understand the value of civilian oversight in military operations. When Roberts met Sarah at the security checkpoint, his initial assessment was typical of how many military personnel viewed Pentagon contractors. She appeared to be another civilian bureaucrat who had never served in uniform but had been given authority to evaluate military operations. Her business attire and contractor badge reinforced the impression that she was disconnected from the realities of submarine service. The morning briefing was held in the base's main conference room, where active-duty submarine officers presented operational readiness reports to the assembled contractors. Sarah took her place among the other civilian assessors, quietly observing the proceedings while taking detailed notes about the submarine crew's capabilities and training status. Lieutenant Commander Roberts introduced the briefing by explaining the current operational tempo of the submarine fleet and the challenges facing crews who were maintaining high deployment rates while adapting to new technologies and evolving threats. His presentation was professional and comprehensive, covering everything from crew training to maintenance schedules to strategic deployment patterns. The other contractors in the room asked routine questions about budgets, personnel allocations, and administrative procedures that reflected their backgrounds in defense contracting and Pentagon bureaucracy. Their inquiries focused on the kind of metrics and reporting requirements that were typically emphasized in civilian oversight of military operations. Sarah remained silent during most of the briefing, but Roberts noticed that she was taking unusually detailed notes and seemed to be paying particular attention to technical aspects of submarine operations that the other contractors largely ignored. Her questions when she finally spoke were different from what he expected from a civilian assessor. Instead of asking about administrative procedures or budget allocations, Sarah inquired about specific technical aspects of submarine operations that demonstrated surprisingly sophisticated knowledge. She asked about sonar performance in different acoustic environments, the impact of crew rotation schedules on operational effectiveness, and the challenges of maintaining nuclear propulsion systems during extended deployments. Roberts found himself increasingly puzzled by Sarah's line of questioning. Her inquiries suggested familiarity with submarine operations that went far beyond what civilian contractors typically possessed. She seemed to understand the technical complexity of submarine warfare in ways that usually required years of hands-on experience with submarine systems and operations. When Sarah asked about the specific challenges of commanding nuclear submarines during high-stakes operations, Roberts began to suspect that her background might be more complex than her civilian contractor status suggested. Her questions demonstrated understanding of command decision-making processes and operational stresses that were typically known only to submarine officers who had actually served in command positions. The briefing concluded with a scheduled tour of the submarine facilities, including visits to submarines that were currently in port for maintenance and crew training. Sarah and the other contractors were escorted through the complex security procedures required for access to nuclear submarines, providing them with first-hand exposure to the sophisticated technology and operational requirements of the submarine fleet. As they walked along the submarine piers, Roberts continued to observe Sarah's behavior and reactions, while the other contractors seemed impressed by the general scale and complexity of submarine operations. Sarah appeared to be evaluating specific details with the practiced eye of someone who had extensive experience with submarine systems and procedures. When they boarded USS Hartford, a Los Angeles-class submarine, Sarah's familiarity with submarine layouts and systems became even more apparent. She moved through the cramped spaces with the confidence of someone who had spent significant time in similar environments, and her questions about specific systems and procedures demonstrated technical knowledge that surprised both Roberts and the submarine's crew. The submarine's commanding officer, Commander Mike Chen, joined the tour and was immediately struck by Sarah's sophisticated understanding of submarine operations. Her questions about sonar systems, weapons capabilities, and navigation procedures were more detailed and technically informed than anything he typically heard from civilian contractors or Pentagon assessors. Commander Chen began to suspect that Sarah's background included military service, but her civilian contractor status and the nature of her assignment suggested that any previous military experience had been in administrative or support roles rather than operational positions. Her knowledge seemed too comprehensive and practical to have been gained through civilian defense contracting alone. The tour continued through the submarine's control room, where Sarah demonstrated familiarity with navigation systems, communication equipment, and the complex procedures required for submarine operations. Her questions about command and control procedures were particularly sophisticated, suggesting understanding of the challenges and responsibilities involved in submarine command. As the morning progressed, word began to spread among the base personnel about the civilian contractor who seemed to possess unusually comprehensive knowledge of submarine operations. Junior officers who had interacted with Sarah during the briefing and tour shared their observations about her technical expertise and professional demeanor. The reaction from younger officers was mixed. Some were impressed by Sarah's knowledge and professionalism, while others were skeptical about a civilian contractor who seemed to be questioning established procedures and operational methods. The natural tension between military personnel and civilian oversight was complicated by Sarah's obvious expertise and the respect she seemed to command from senior officers. Lieutenant Commander Roberts found himself in an awkward position. His initial assessment of Sarah as a typical Pentagon bureaucrat had been clearly incorrect, but he wasn't sure how to interpret her actual background or the purpose of her assessment. Her questions and observations suggested expertise that went far beyond civilian contracting, but her official status provided no explanation for her comprehensive knowledge. The situation became more complex when Sarah began asking specific questions about submarine deployment schedules and operational readiness that seemed to require access to classified information. Her inquiries suggested familiarity with strategic submarine operations that would normally be restricted to personnel with appropriate security clearances and operational need to know. Commander Chen realized that Sarah's assessment activities were revealing gaps in his understanding of her background and authority. Her questions were too sophisticated and too well-informed to be coming from a routine contractor evaluation, and her obvious expertise suggested that she might be conducting a more comprehensive assessment than had been initially indicated. The morning's activities concluded with a return to the conference room for a debrief session where the contractors would present their preliminary observations and recommendations. Sarah's presentation was scheduled last, after the other contractors had offered their routine assessments of administrative procedures and resource allocation issues. When Sarah began her presentation, the tone and content immediately distinguished her from the other contractors. Instead of focusing on bureaucratic procedures and budget considerations, she provided a comprehensive analysis of submarine operational capabilities, crew training effectiveness, and strategic readiness that demonstrated intimate familiarity with every aspect of submarine warfare. Her assessment included detailed observations about sonar performance, weapon systems effectiveness, crew rotation impacts on operational readiness, and the strategic implications of current deployment patterns. The depth and sophistication of her analysis surprised everyone in the room, including senior officers who had decades of submarine experience. Sarah's presentation concluded with specific recommendations for improving submarine operational effectiveness that were based on practical understanding of submarine warfare rather than theoretical knowledge or administrative oversight. Her suggestions addressed real operational challenges and demonstrated comprehensive understanding of the complex factors that affected submarine mission success. The reaction from the assembled officers was immediate and profound. Sarah's presentation had revealed a level of expertise and understanding that was clearly based on extensive operational experience rather than civilian oversight or administrative review. Her knowledge of submarine operations was too comprehensive and too practical to have been gained through any civilian role. Commander Chen requested a private meeting with Sarah following her presentation. The depth of her knowledge and the sophistication of her recommendations had convinced him that her background included significant military experience that hadn't been adequately explained by her civilian contractor status. During their private conversation, Sarah acknowledged that her background included Navy service, but she was vague about the specific nature of her military experience. Her reluctance to provide details about her service record suggested that her previous assignments might have involved classified operations or sensitive positions that couldn't be easily discussed in civilian settings. The mystery surrounding Sarah's background deepened when base personnel began researching her credentials and attempting to understand how a civilian contractor had gained such comprehensive knowledge of submarine operations. Her official Pentagon contractor status was legitimate, but it provided no explanation for her obvious expertise in submarine warfare. Lieutenant Commander Roberts was tasked with investigating Sarah's background more thoroughly, but his initial inquiries revealed only that she had held a series of civilian defense positions following her retirement from Navy service. The specific nature of her military career remained unclear, and her service record appeared to be partially classified or restricted. The situation reached a turning point when Sarah was scheduled to observe submarine operations from the base's command center. Her presence during actual submarine maneuvers would provide additional insight into her assessment activities while potentially revealing more about her background and expertise. As Sarah took her position in the command center, base personnel noticed that she seemed completely comfortable with the complex procedures and sophisticated equipment used to coordinate submarine operations. Her observations and questions demonstrated familiarity with submarine command procedures that suggested extensive experience with actual submarine operations. The command center activities were interrupted by an unexpected development. USS Columbia, a Virginia-class submarine that had been conducting training exercises in the Atlantic, requested permission to return to port earlier than scheduled. The submarine's commanding officer reported that the training exercise had been successfully completed and that the crew was ready to return to base. What made this development unusual was that USS Columbia specifically requested to moor at the pier where Sarah's assessment activities were taking place. The submarine's commanding officer indicated that the early return was related to the contractor assessment activities, though the specific connection wasn't immediately clear to base personnel. As USS Columbia approached the base, Sarah's demeanor changed noticeably. She became more focused and attentive, watching the submarine's approach with obvious interest and familiarity. Her behavior suggested personal connection to the submarine rather than professional curiosity about its operations. The submarine's arrival created considerable interest among base personnel, who were curious about why USS Columbia had returned early and why its commanding officer had requested a specific pier assignment. The submarine's sleek profile and advanced technology made it an impressive sight as it approached the dock, but Sarah's reaction suggested that her interest was more personal than professional. As USS Columbia completed its mooring procedures, base personnel were surprised to see members of the submarine's crew gathering on the deck in what appeared to be a formal reception formation. The crew's behavior suggested that they were preparing to honor someone important, though the identity of that person wasn't immediately clear. When the submarine's commanding officer, Commander Lisa Park, emerged from the vessel, she immediately scanned the assembled base personnel until she located Sarah among the group of contractors and observers. Her recognition was immediate and obvious, and she began walking directly towards Sarah with a smile that suggested personal familiarity and professional respect. Commander Park's approach to Sarah was accompanied by a formal salute that surprised everyone present. The salute was not the courtesy acknowledgement typically given to civilian contractors, but the respectful recognition accorded to senior military personnel or distinguished veterans. Sarah's response was equally formal and professional, suggesting military background and command experience. The exchange between Commander Park and Sarah was brief, but clearly meaningful. Commander Park's respectful demeanor and obvious recognition indicated that Sarah's background included significant military service, and her submarine crew's formal reception suggested that Sarah had held a position of considerable authority and respect within the submarine community. Lieutenant Commander Roberts and the other base personnel watched in stunned silence as the implications of what they were witnessing became clear. Sarah was not just another Pentagon contractor with administrative oversight responsibilities. She was someone who commanded respect and recognition from active-duty submarine personnel, including the commanding officer of one of the Navy's most advanced nuclear submarines. The revelation of Sarah's true background came when Commander Park addressed her formally as Commander Mitchell and thanked her for her previous service as commanding officer of USS Columbia. The acknowledgement confirmed what base personnel had begun to suspect. Sarah was a former submarine commander who had served in one of the most demanding and prestigious positions in the Navy. The impact of this revelation was immediate and profound. The junior officers who had dismissed Sarah as just another civilian contractor realized that they had been in the presence of someone who had commanded nuclear submarines and had earned the respect of the submarine community through operational excellence and professional achievement. Sarah's response to Commander Park's recognition was characteristically understated. She acknowledged the greeting with professional courtesy, but avoided drawing attention to her background or seeking recognition for her previous service. Her behavior reflected the professionalism and humility that had characterized her approach to the assessment activities. Commander Park's crew had gathered on USS Columbia's deck to honor their former commanding officer, and their respectful attention demonstrated the impact that Sarah had made during her military service. The crew's formal recognition was a testament to her leadership and the respect she had earned through her command of one of the Navy's most sophisticated submarines. Base personnel began to understand that Sarah's assessment activities had been conducted by someone with intimate knowledge of submarine operations gained through actual command experience. Her technical expertise, sophisticated questions, and comprehensive understanding of submarine warfare now made complete sense in the context of her background as a former submarine commander. The revelation also explained why Sarah's recommendations had been so practical and well-informed. Her suggestions for improving submarine operational effectiveness were based on first-hand experience with the challenges and responsibilities of submarine command, rather than theoretical knowledge or administrative oversight. Lieutenant Commander Roberts realized that his initial assessment of Sarah had been completely wrong. Instead of dismissing her as a civilian contractor who didn't understand military operations, he should have recognized that her expertise and professionalism indicated significant military background and operational experience. Sarah's former position as commanding officer of USS Columbia placed her among the most elite officers in the Navy. Submarine command was one of the most demanding and prestigious assignments available to naval officers, requiring exceptional technical knowledge, leadership ability, and decision-making skills under the most challenging conditions. The fact that Sarah had commanded a nuclear submarine also meant that she had been entrusted with some of the most sensitive and important responsibilities in the military. Nuclear submarine commanders were responsible for weapons systems, strategic operations, and crew safety in ways that required the highest levels of professional competence and personal integrity. Commander Park's recognition of Sarah also revealed the continuing respect and affection that submarine personnel maintained for former commanders who had served with distinction. The crew's formal reception demonstrated the lasting impact that effective submarine commanders had on the personnel who served under their leadership. As word spread throughout the base about Sarah's background, the attitude of personnel toward her assessment activities changed dramatically. Instead of viewing her as an outsider who was imposing civilian oversight on military operations, they began to understand that she was a distinguished veteran who was contributing her expertise to improve submarine effectiveness. Sarah's approach to her contractor role had been consistent with the professionalism and humility that had characterized her military service. She had conducted her assessment activities without seeking recognition for her background, focusing instead on providing valuable insights and recommendations based on her extensive experience. The revelation of Sarah's true background also provided context for understanding why her assessment had been so comprehensive and sophisticated. Her ability to evaluate submarine operations with such depth and precision reflected not just theoretical knowledge, but practical experience gained through years of submarine command and operational responsibility. The impact of Sarah's visit extended beyond the immediate assessment activities. Her presence at the base and her interaction with current submarine personnel served as a reminder of the continuing contributions that veteran submarine officers made to the Navy's operational effectiveness even after their formal military service had ended. Base personnel began to appreciate that Sarah's civilian contractor status represented a continuation of her service rather than a departure from it. Her work in assessing and improving submarine operations allowed her to continue contributing to the submarine community's effectiveness while bringing the perspective of someone who had actually commanded nuclear submarines in operational settings. The story of Sarah's visit to Naval Submarine Base New London became part of the base's folklore, serving as a reminder to personnel about the importance of respecting expertise, regardless of its source, and recognizing that distinguished service could continue in many different forms after retirement from active duty. Commander Park's decision to return USS Columbia to port early and provide formal recognition to Sarah demonstrated the submarine community's commitment to honoring those who had served with distinction and continuing to benefit from their expertise and experience. Sarah's assessment report, when it was finally submitted, reflected the comprehensive understanding and practical insights that could only come from someone who had actually commanded nuclear submarines. Her recommendations were implemented and contributed to improved submarine operational effectiveness throughout the fleet. The incident also served as a learning experience for younger officers like Lieutenant Commander Roberts, who gained appreciation for the diverse backgrounds and experiences that could contribute to military effectiveness. Sarah's example demonstrated that expertise and professionalism deserved recognition regardless of current duty status or civilian contractor role. Years later, base personnel would remember Sarah's visit as a reminder that the submarine community's strength came not just from active duty personnel, but from the continuing contributions of veterans who maintained their commitment to submarine excellence long after their formal military service had ended. Sarah Mitchell's story became a testament to the idea that true service to the submarine community could continue in many different forms, and that the expertise gained through submarine command remained valuable long after retirement from active duty. Her quiet professionalism and continued dedication to submarine effectiveness exemplified the best traditions of the submarine service.